Okay, thanks everyone for coming and for bearing with us as we work through setting up the sound. Good morning to everyone in North America, and very early good morning to people tuning in from other parts of the world. And in New Zealand, I know we have some people. So today, I'd like to run through the platform APIs. As Walter mentioned, my name is Sean Bennett, and I am the CTO of Stronghold. We're going to walk through a brief overview of what the platform APIs allow, including a quick touch on the protocols that it plugs into, the values that can be transferred across it, including the Stronghold USD. We'll then walk through some use cases and some examples of how the APIs can be used to empower those use cases. And then we'll finish off by touching on some getting started steps with the APIs and where we're going to be heading in the future. So let's just jump into it. So what are Stronghold's platform APIs? So some of you may realize that Stronghold operates a public-facing cryptocurrency exchange. And as we were building this, we soon realized that we were actually building financial services infrastructure. We decided to open this up to allow other developers and businesses to take advantage of what we created over the last year and use this in their own products and services. So that's what the platform APIs allow you to do. So there's really three main pieces to it. Programmatic access to blockchain networks, and this allows you to transfer and trade various kinds of value, and also record data. What sorts of value do we have on the platform APIs at the moment? One of the most well-known ones is the Stronghold USD stable coin. However, we also do allow cryptocurrencies to be traded and transferred. And we also allow, through the APIs, user-defined tokens to be moved around. And these could include things like ICO tokens or other internal stores of value or accounting representations. One of the unique things I think about is, as we built the exchange, it had to plug into many various different sorts of blockchain protocols. We ended up creating a single interface on top of these, abstracting away the complexities of the individual protocols and allowing for a more business logic API to evolve out of that. So what that means is, as a business, you can take advantage of multiple blockchain protocols with a single integration. So you don't need to onboard developers that have specific blockchain protocol knowledge. High-level blockchain conceptual knowledge will suffice. So this allows you to have a go and try multiple protocols, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So one of the problems that a lot of businesses have when mapping the use case to the blockchain is, which protocol do I choose? And there are many different protocols. Here's a view of some of the more well-known ones. So Bitcoin, of course, the first one, which is now a decade old, and totally has very valid use cases, but is quite restrictive because it only carries one sort of value, generally. The Bitcoin has quite a slow confirmation time, fees are relatively high, and throughput is quite slow. However, it is the decentralization mechanism, some would argue, is very good, and the distribution mechanism meant that a lot of Bitcoins are put into multiple people's hands quite early on. So still valid use cases there. Ethereum, of course, brought us smart contracts. The throughput, again, is quite low, but the power that smart contracts give businesses means it can't be ignored. And then we have the networks really built for on-ledger trade and foreign exchange, cross-border payments, like Ripple and Stellar, which are quite similar, very high throughput, but the sorts of activities you can perform on them are more limited compared to Ethereum. There are no smart contracts. There are simple contracts that you can do, particularly now that they both have Lightning-like payment channel integrations. But very much they sort your financial institution sort of integration. And of course, there are literally hundreds or thousands of other blockchains with different protocols, different rules, different sorts of values, and different use cases that you might want to place on top of them. So what do you eventually go with, or what should you eventually go with? Whatever suits your use case. Don't just pick a particular blockchain because, oh, the price of the coin is really good, or, oh, I know someone who made a lot of money with it, or, oh, I know someone who works at that particular blockchain company. Make sure it suits your use case. Don't be picking it for any other reason. And one thing to remember is there's no harm in using multiple protocols. In fact, a lot of really good products tend to do this. So they might use one network for data storage and another one for transactional movement of ownership or value. A common example is you'll see Ethereum for logic connected to a decentralized storage engine, like storage, for storing files. In Stronghold's case, what did we end up choosing? Did we just choose one? Did we choose all of them? To some degree, we did both of these. We had to plug into every blockchain because we needed to be able to accept deposits and withdrawals on those particular protocols. But as an exchange provider, we needed a place to bring all of those together. And the protocol we chose for that was Stelar. And very simply, we did it for speed, cost, and scale. It's very fast with transactions confirmed in seconds. It's very cheap. 1 cent, 1 US cent will pay for approximately 100,000 transactions, thereabouts. So transactions are almost free. And it's also relatively scalable. It was tested when this slide went out at about 1,000 concurrent transactions. We think it can do about 3,000 in the right network conditions. And that is fast enough to be able to do on-ledger trading, including order books. And we'll come back to why that's important later. There are other protocols that might suit us, but right now, Stelar made perfect sense. The other really important thing here is that Stelar has multi-currency support, which means that besides the native token lumens inside the network, much akin to Bitcoin's Bitcoin or Ethereum's Ether, you can issue in other sorts of custom-defined tokens into the network. And we use this to essentially introduce foreign blockchains' value onto Stelar so that there's a whole heap of value inside the Stelar network. And we do this through a process called anchoring. And what is anchoring? Essentially, we take a value, let's say it's a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, from the Bitcoin network and transfer the token of that Bitcoin in and out of Stelar. It's a ramp in and out of the Stelar network. So what the result is you now have tokens that represent the outside value all in the same venue. So now you have inside Stelar the native lumen, as well as tokens representing other assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, fiat currencies like the Stronghold USD, or any other arbitrary value. You could have property rights here, say. And the anchors are the businesses or institutions that provide the service by which value moves in and out. And it's important to have all the value in the same place so that now you can operate on them with payments and trade, those sorts of things. So why use Stronghold's Platform APIs? Programmatic access to the Stronghold USD stable token. Unlike most other stable tokens, Stronghold provides a non-blockchain specific interface. So if you're looking to interact with the stable token, you don't need to go and hire expensive blockchain developers and spend long periods of time integrating into Ethereum smart contracts or whatever it might be. You're now able to plug into an HTTP REST API and start creating accounts and moving Stronghold USD as easy as, say, an integration into PayPal or a service like that. In that same one integration, you are now accessing multiple blockchain protocols. Currently, we publicly offer Stelar, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. And therefore, you are able to move and manipulate any of the value types that are currently in there. So the currencies we support at the moment, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Lumen, US dollar, and we do have support for custom tokens. What is the Stronghold US dollar? It is often referred to as the stablecoin. It is a one-to-one US dollar backed token. So for every token of US dollar inside the blockchain network, which is currently Stellar, there is one US dollar held by a custodian, essentially sitting in a bank account. Stronghold US dollar is accepted by financial institutions. So one of the problems with cryptocurrencies that we see with some of our larger enterprise integrations are that they can't touch cryptocurrencies. That's often the phrase that we've heard from compliance teams. We can't touch it. We can't account for it. Legal won't let us hold it or even trade it. However, when you now talk to them about a stable coin, a fiat-backed stable coin, to them, it's still on a cryptographic network. So some might describe it as a cryptocurrency, but it's not a new type of currency. It is the same United States dollar that they know very well today. However, it just happens to move on top of blockchain-based rails. So you get the benefits of the traditional asset that everyone knows, but the new enhanced payment systems. Because it is a currency that people already know and recognize, the accounting becomes a lot simpler. A lot of the earlier products to move value on top of blockchain required businesses to start worrying about the tax implications of, say, sending a cross-border payment where they went in and out of Bitcoin. They might only hold the Bitcoin for a few minutes while the trade settles, but unfortunately, they now have to think about, okay, do we have to start accounting for any capital gains or currency gains in that short period of time? So that made accounting a lot more complex. So what are some of the things that people can do with the Stronghold US dollar? You can send payments using the underlying provider, which is Stelar, in 3 to 5 seconds. So you get essentially real-time settlement. And the important piece here is the settlement happens at the same time as the messaging. So often the case in the traditional movement of something like US dollar, you'd send a message to another institution in the world saying, hey, I'm sending you $10. But those $10 wouldn't actually be available to the recipient for, in many cases, days. That is because the actual settlement of the money, and therefore the availability of the money to the counterparty, is a completely separate process than the messaging, which is just informing, getting the wheels turning and letting the person know that the money is on the way. But because we're using the blockchain here and the stablecoin, those two things happen concurrently. And the other important thing is you can deposit and withdraw from the anchor, and this can happen programmatically or manually. And some of the payment methods that we support for this are ACH in the US, so you can have funds deducted from your account and then entered into the Stronghold USD on the blockchain. Wire transfer, US international, and we're also working on debit card for payouts. So instead of having to withdraw money via a wire transfer, you could just dispense funds directly from credit cards at major retailers. We are working on international efforts to have non-US bank support, and we're also looking to onboard more currencies as time goes on. Okay, so how is the API structured? The main piece to get your head around is the concept of the venue on the platform APIs. A venue is a combination of a particular protocol and a particular context. The protocol is simply the rules of the network. Does it run the Bitcoin protocol? Does it run the Stellar protocol? What are those rules that dictate how transactions are processed, how cryptographic verifications are made? The context is, how is that protocol running? What nodes are we connecting to? What versions of the software are we running? Is this the public network where everyone's plugged into each other? Or is this a private or consortium network, i.e. a network between banks, say, that's closed off to the public world. So an example here is a Stellar public network is defined as the venue of the Stellar protocol and the public context. We connect to public nodes, and Stronghold runs some of those public nodes. Another example of a venue would be a client-specific Ethereum. So perhaps a business wants to run a Ethereum network to process internal transactions using smart contracts. That venue would be an Ethereum protocol, but a private context and specific node connections to be made. Some of these venues are predefined by Stronghold, and those mostly relate to the public networks. However, we do, and forecast specific needs around access or data privacy. And so we can set those up ad hoc. What the venue system really allows you to do is to essentially choose which network or which venue your accounts are being created in, or your value is being transferred between, or your trades are being placed in. And this is what powers the multiple blockchain protocol feature, because you are using the same API calls, no matter if it is the Stellar public network or a client-specific Ethereum behind the scenes. When you create an account, that's the same operation on the API. You send a payment, it's largely the same operation on the API. So there's no need to build all these additional pieces to interact with a new blockchain. So once you've moved past the venue process and you are now scoped into a particular venue, let's say it's the Stellar public network, you'll now interact with the specific APIs. Accounts is the base of most implementations. You'll need to create accounts for the business, or sometimes you'll create accounts for individual users. And essentially, these are multi-currency wallets where the protocol allows. So in the case of Bitcoin, it's a wallet that can only hold one currency. But something like Stelar, it can hold any of the tokens inside the network. So you could use these to provision digital wallets to your users. You could create an account for every single one of them, or you could create accounts for the business for position of sale systems, and we'll talk about that later. Once you have accounts, you will no doubt start using the payments APIs to move value between these accounts. And payment refers to any transfer of value within a particular venue. So let's say, again, we're on the Stellar network. A payment example would be sending the Ethereum token between two different accounts. And because that is on the Stellar public network, that will take 3 to 5 seconds. One of the important and more unique parts of the Stronghold API is the anchoring interface. And essentially this allows you to move value in and out of the venue. So a good example of this is, say you have US dollars in a bank account and you're trying to move that into the Stronghold USD token to perform various payments, then you would use the anchor service to programmatically initiate an ACH pull. So that's a direct debit. So you could call this and have $100 debited from your account, which will be available inside one of the API accounts in a few days. And the other piece is trade. And this really depends on what the underlying venue is. There's a couple of ways that this could work. If the blockchain protocol behind the venue allows it, you have direct access to network intrinsic value trading. And an example of this would be inside Stelar, which has a built-in order book and it executes the trades itself. So it actually utilizes the underlying built-in features to do that. However, there are some networks where trade is not built in, and an example is on Bitcoin, which essentially have that one value type and you can move it around. So trade would not be available there. But on something like Ethereum, where you might have ERC20 tokens, Stronghold uses off-ledger trade. So you can still call those trade APIs, but the order book and the trade execution will be handled by Stronghold. So it's the placement of the orders and the actual crossing of trades will happen off ledger, but Stronghold will then settle the trades using payments directly in the network. So on Ethereum, we were trading, say, Ether for an ERC20 token. You would see the value move, but the actual trade would have happened internally. So often in these blockchain networks, there is disparity in what sort of functionality is actually provided by that protocol. And so Stronghold will often bridge the gap and fill in any pieces with off-ledger technology or with sidechains, depending on what you're needing to do. Okay, so now that we've gone through that, let's start to talk about some of the things you can do with the APIs. So let's walk through some use cases. We'll run through 3, cross-border payments, point of sale system, and then we'll talk about token issuance. So cross-border payments have often been the target for blockchain-based payment systems because it's a sector that is just growing all the time, and the total addressable market is absolutely massive. So blockchain can be used to enhance some of the traditional methods of sending these funds around to make it cheaper and faster. So how would this map across into the APIs? Well, let's take the simple example of where we have people trying to send funds from the US to Australia. So you could create an account for the sender and the receiver. Let's say you were a money transfer operator based out of the US and you had an affiliate down in Australia. With the sender and receiver now owning blockchain-based accounts, you could call the anchor service to deposit USD, say for ACH, to the sender's account. This is essentially the sender doing the send step. So to your customer, their money's been removed from their account, and it is now reflected on the blockchain and ready for transfer. However, this is cross-currency, so we then look to the trade service to actually trade the US dollar on the ledger to Australian dollar. And because Stelar, if this was the venue for this was Stelar, has a built-in order book, you would be able to look for the appropriate Australian dollar token. And these tokens could be provided by other anchors than Stronghold. So an example is another company called Novarti in Australia recently publicly announced that they are launching an Australian dollar stablecoin. So while this isn't a Stronghold product, because you are on the open blockchain, you could use the Stronghold API to trade into the Australian dollar. So you would be able to buy Australian dollars, Novarti Australian dollars, using Stronghold US dollars. So now the sending account owns Australian dollars anchored by Novarti. What you will now do is send the Australian dollars to the receiver. So again, use the payment API. Now the receiver has Novarti issued Australian dollars in their account. You use the anchor service to withdraw that to the receiver's bank account. And that will be a domestic bank transfer in Australia. So to the sender and receiver, they didn't need to interact with any blockchain behaviors. All they saw was a regular bank direct debit in the US, and the receiver saw a regular looking bank deposit in Australia in the currencies that they knew. However, you've used the power of the public ledger, having both access to those order books as well as other tokens on the network to send value. And the actual transfer between the sender and receiver, once those anchored tokens were purchased, will happen within 3 to 5 seconds. However, you still have the traditional banking system delays on either side. So that's one example of how a cross-border payment could be made in say, the retail remittance space. There's many other ways you might apply the APIs. That's just an example. Okay, another example, and one that we're currently seeing some interest in and some early integrations in, is point of sale systems. And particularly where users are currently using cash. However, often in those cash-based systems, users will have smartphones. So the assumptions for this particular use case are that the users have smartphones. One of the suggestions we've made is you could create a digital wallet for your customers, and they could fund those using fiat currency. So you would use the account API to create the digital wallets and the anchoring systems to introduce cash into those wallets. Now, often in these sorts of cases, the user, particularly if it's in a developing nation or say Southeast Asia, won't actually have access to bank accounts. The merchant will, but not the customer. So there are other ways of introducing cash into the system. There are other token issuers on top of Stellar that are providing, walk-in cash deposit services at, at corner stores akin to 7-Elevens, those sorts of things. So a customer could pre-fund their account using cash at some stage before the transaction. So when they come to your store, you're able to provide them a QR code or similar, and that initiates a payment. So using the payments endpoint, you're able to link that to a particular transaction, which you can generate on a POS system, and essentially now you're handling POS type transactions. Once those tokens hit the merchant's account, they will be able to use the anchor service to withdraw those proceeds directly to their bank account. Another space where we see some problems started to come up are in the token issuer space. So a lot of businesses have issued ICOs, and one of the use cases Stronghold does support is actually ICO sales in terms of the actual sale, because we can enable the trade and the receipt of, say, Bitcoin and Ethereum. But for this particular example, I'm talking about after the company's raised funds and built a product. A lot of them have a product that runs based on a utility token. And users who are looking to interact with that product will need to somehow obtain that utility token to be able to interact with the product. However, those are new behaviors that some users might have to learn. Sure, a lot of them will be crypto savvy, but you may be alienating a large part of your potential market if you don't let them interact directly with a traditional currency. And actually, getting hold of those tokens can be quite difficult, depending on your token's liquidity, the KYC steps needed to actually have an exchange account. It creates quite a burden on that user trying to interact with what you have. So one of the things the APIs allow you to do is to directly accept traditional currency and have that traded in the background to whatever token is used in the background. So how would that work in this case? Using the create account API, you could create some receiving accounts for the business. You don't always have to create accounts for every single individual user. It depends on your need. And then you can use the anchor service to receive currency directly to the account. And what you could do there is connect it to the user's payment methods, whether it be bank or a debit card, and have that accounts. You could do the trade on their behalf, converting it into the custom token, and then it's accounting as normal for you. At that stage, you now have a user with a balance of your custom token. You could display the balance to the customer still in whatever currency they deposited, so it might be US dollar, but in the background, your ecosystem is working the same as always. It's just reading your custom token. So this allows you to easily bridge the traditional world with your custom token ecosystem, and your users don't have to learn about all the nuances of crypto to be able to use your fantastic product. Okay, so with all that said, how do you get started using the APIs? Here's a link to the documentation, which is the first place you should look, which details out the various APIs. We've talked about them categorically today: venues, payments, trade. The first thing you'll need to do is create a credential, and this is essentially your password, your authentication. At the moment, we are finalizing our beta program, so each credential needs approval. So if you can email happiness@stronghold.co, if you could give us a short description of your use case, we can often give you some pointers on what we think the best integration method is, and your credentials ID will have that approved, and you'll be able to start working. And approval normally takes about 2 days. Some starter tips. When you create the credential, please only send us the ID. It's very important you keep your secret and passphrase safe. Those are for your protection as much as ours, to ensure that only you can be signing your requests. And with the passphrase, it means that Stronghold isn't able to make any requests on your behalf either. One other tip is to use Postman. So the documentation is actually written in Postman, so you can directly import that and send requests to the APIs without having to directly put that into code. So that's great to play around and experiment. And one of our early developers actually created a great little script that allows you to handle the authentication with the credentials very easily. So in Postman, you can paste in a pre-request signature script, and it handles all of the digital signing around creating a well-formed request. And we'll put that link somewhere in the description so you can view that. And on that note, we're really wanting to build a community of developers. So internally, we are building client libraries, and we're currently targeting JavaScript, TypeScript, and Golang. But we'd absolutely love your help. And this could be, very small contributions like code snippets, helper scripts, tutorials, or as large as client libraries. And if you're planning on doing any of these, please reach out to us early. We might be able to lend a hand and support you in that process, and also just to make sure that we're not duplicating up on anything. So to kickstart this off, we're going to be offering 250 Stronghold US dollar prizes for small contributions. Think short tutorials, just the use of 1 or 2 APIs, code snippets that show a basic account creation perhaps, or short scripts like the one we showed just before. Please let us know if you've made anything by emailing us at happiness@stronghold.co. And for those, the Stronghold USD vouchers, entries close 26th of November. These are, we're not asking for entire projects to be made. These are a couple hours spent one night to create something useful that might help another developer out there. That's really what we're looking for there. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the overview of the APIs, and open the floor to any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Sean. We have received a few questions since the start of the webinar, starting with, actually, here's a question. Can you please run through a use case of programmatically transferring XLM lumens through Stronghold Stellar from wallet 1 to wallet 2?
Sorry, I just realized, should we take this out so that we hear the question being asked?
Sure, yeah. Sorry, I'll repeat that. So the question we received, can you please run through a use case of programmatically transferring XLM lumens through Stronghold Stellar from wallet 1 to wallet 2?
Okay, so for moving lumens, we're really looking at the payment API. So our account API currently creates wallets in the venue for you. However, we do plan on adding the ability to capture existing wallets and wrap them in create a handle to them on the Stronghold API for accounts that might already exist out there. But let's say the accounts didn't exist yet. You would use the accounts API to create the two wallets, and then the payment API to move that value between two of them. So that's a simpler one because all of the value is already in a particular venue, so there's no anchoring. And the anchoring is the piece that tends to add the complexity because you're moving value over, protocol lines, so to speak.
And a follow-up, what would be the expectations for the timing of that transfer?
So a Lumen to Lumen transfer inside Stellar, the actual blockchain transfer would take 3 to 5 seconds. You can expect 1 to 2 seconds of extra latency from Stronghold's processing, and that's mainly around compliance, just making sure we have the appropriate information to make that transfer.
Very good. Chai Queen 17 asked, what is the process for international funding, top up, and redemption into fiat currency?
Great question. So at the moment, for easy domestic fund movement in and out, we support the United States, but that's just where we're started off. Currently, international funding and withdrawal happens via international wires. We are looking at expanding our distribution collection networks into other countries, so we have easier domestic, on and off ramps that are more tailored for retail customers. But for even for SME and business and integration, enterprise integrations, international wire seems to be sufficient. But we are working on that.
Very good. Another question from, and I'm sorry if I mangled his name, Guija Lopez in Barcelona. Could you confirm that, here I'll show you, that post, he's asking about a particular API function is working. I've been trying the API and I get stuck creating an account, getting a status code 404, 6 says false response.
Okay, so the thing here is ensuring that the venue ID you're picking is correct. So what the question really speaks to there is, I'm looking to create an account and it's giving me a 404, it's not found. What the most likely problem there is the venue selection isn't quite correct. So for all of our APIs that perform any sort of interaction with the blockchain, you have to tell it which protocol and context it is connecting to. And so to do that, you pick the appropriate venue ID. This question actually comes from the fantastic developer who created the pre-request signature script there. So I'll reach out to you separately after this to make sure we have that working for you.
Excellent. Pete Van Velden asked, when will you allow Stronghold USD trading on StellarX.com for the general public without requiring authorization?
So one of the big pieces for Stronghold US dollar is that we want to make sure it is usable by financial institutions because they have some, compliance aspects that they need to be comfortable with before they interact with these sorts of protocols, right? And Stronghold makes sure that all of our value that we introduce as an anchor is acceptable to them. What that really means is that we enforce know your customer rules, so we have to identify users a little bit more broadly than some of the other issuers out there. So what that means is anyone who holds the Stronghold US dollar, that wallet, we need to know who owns it, essentially. And we do this for anti-money laundering, countering financing of terrorism and sanctions screening. Because we do that, it means that a lot of FIs or financial institutions, are a lot happier holding the coins because they can do their own compliance process over the top. So how does that affect StellarX? What that means is we're never going to remove, or at least there's no plans to at this stage, the authorization required flag. So every wallet that is created either needs to be created by the Stronghold APIs, because generally we know who you are when you're interacting with that, or it needs to be authorized in some other fashion. We've been running a private beta on Stronghold USD, and through that we have been authorizing public Stellar accounts to hold the funds. So those accounts are able to trade on Stellar X, and you'll notice that there are people currently trading the US dollar. We have plans to expand that into retail, starting off directly inside Stronghold itself, but it's likely to be another 6 to 8 weeks before we enable a way for non-Stronghold customers, non-Stronghold retail customers, to be able to access the token. So essentially, there will have to be KYC with Stronghold to even hold it, but we'll provide a pathway for our users to be able to do that outside of Stronghold eventually.
Great. Those are all the questions we've gotten so far. I guess we can probably wrap up for today. Thanks again to everyone who attended the webinar today. We will be posting this online on our YouTube channel and also sharing it on social media. Oh, I'm sorry, one more question has just come in from Vijeta Bhatt. Was trying to use deposit API in the Postman collection, but it does not work. Can you please guide us? It's something that may be tied to that 404 issue you were just talking about, possibly.
Okay, so for the deposit API, generally the important things are the payment attributes. So depending on the payment method used, whether that's wire or ACH, there's a different set of attributes that's needed. And some of the documentation for that is actually still private because we were using it for our enterprise integrations. So if you can just contact happiness at stronghold.co and send through any errors, they'll be able to look at it and point you in the right direction.
Great. All right, well, we look forward to seeing your submissions for our developer contest. Thanks again for watching today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. We're actually planning a hackathon early next year, so look for word about that as well. All right, thanks very much.
Thanks very much.